Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So we are starting a little earlier than yesterday. I want to thank you all for joining the call today. Um, I'm going to get started just for the sake of time, and then we'll let people come in as they come in. But good morning. Welcome back to our second day of our symposium. Yesterday, we really did build on a strong foundation by exploring the patient journey and the clinical standards guide here in Canada. But today we really want to put that knowledge into action. So our focus is going to shift from that regional perspective into some practical support. We're going to explore a little bit more about what has happened and all the news that has come out of ESMO and SMR. And of course, at the end, we'll strategize and navigate the healthcare system and see how we can take all of this knowledge that we had from the past 2 days into power, because we know the voice is very powerful and very transformative. So we're very excited for that. But before I go ahead and jump into our first panel, I just want to have a few quick notes to ensure a very smooth experience for everyone. There are going to be 2 panels today, and we do ask you to submit all your questions at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you can avoid the chat, that'd be fantastic. But if you have a hard time with the Q&A box, feel free to put your question in the chat. We will address them when we can, and we will address them as well during any dedicated Q&A segments. If you're experiencing any technical issues or questions, please message our support team in the Zoom chat and we will help you as soon as we can. So with that being said, I want to introduce our first panel. We're going to begin today with a critical discussion on optimizing care for metastatic uveal melanoma. And like I mentioned, dive into the news that came out of ESMO and SMR this year. We are joined by 2 leading medical oncologists who are at the forefront of this work. First, you have Dr. Marcus Butler, who some of you might know, who's a medical oncologist and melanoma site lead at Princess Margaret Cancer Center in Toronto. He also co-leads our National Ocular Melanoma Physician Task Force that focuses on immuno-based therapies. And for those that are in BC, you might know Dr. Alison Weppler, who's a medical oncologist at BC Cancer in Vancouver and specialized training in melanoma and immuno-oncology from the Peter MacCallum Centre in Australia. So I want to have everyone wish them a warm welcome to being on this call today. A big thank you for joining us. And I am going to pass it on to Dr. Butler, and then we will dive into that panel discussion. So I'll stop sharing my screen here and let Dr. Butler set himself up. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for the chance to chat with everyone. Is my screen sharing at all?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry. Okay, good. Okay, great. So I think you should see the title slide. So I'm going to provide some updates regarding uveal melanoma from SMR and ESMO. Most of the slides actually come from ESMO. There was just a little bit at SMR this year. And a lot of what I'm going to cover are really kind of forward-looking things. These are treatments that are not currently part of the standard of care, but in our discussion, we can talk about where these treatments are and ways that patients can strategize to access some of these therapies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about neoadjuvant treatment for primary tumors. There's also a little bit of data that was released regarding targeted therapy for metastatic disease. There was a mini oral session at ESMO that looked at hepatic perfusion with melphalan. That's the Hepzato or Delcath treatment that was combined with immunotherapy and shows promising results. There's also a new approach to metastatic disease combining immunotherapy and lenvatinib. And uveal melanoma made the headlines this year. In the third presidential session at SMR, there was an abstract presented by Dr. Sapna Patel. Okay, so targeted therapy for primary tumors. This is a completely new type of concept for uveal melanoma. In the past, we've had absolutely no treatment options for patients with local treatments. And based on some early pilot studies, a drug called darovasertib that's showing very good results in the metastatic setting was used as a single agent in patients with primary tumors. In the clinical trial that was presented, there were two cohorts, one group of patients who required enucleation, and another were patients that would need plaque brachytherapy. And about 60% of patients in both cohorts were able to have significant reduction. In fact, more than 80% of patients had some shrinkage of their tumor. And there was a high percentage of patients who were able to have eye-preserving therapy in patients who would otherwise have to lose their eye. And then for the plaque brachytherapy cohort, 60% of patients had at least 20% reduction in the size of the tumor, and that uh, resulted in improvement in vision as well as predicted reduction in radiation exposure to critical eye structures. Here's an example of a patient who had substantial shrinkage of their tumor with therapy and reduction in the predicted radiation that would be needed to treat the primary tumor. So more than 80% of patients have shrinkage, 60% of the patients had preservation of their eye, and there was vision improvement in 60% of patients. There's now a registrational trial, Optimum 010, that is on its way to being opened. Now, this targeted therapy with darovasertib is also used in the metastatic setting, where patients will combine darovasertib with the second drug called crizotinib. And this has resulted in a significant improvement in single-arm studies where in our early phase 2, phase 1b, phase 2, there was at least a 31% deep response rate, disease control rate in 84%, and an improvement in overall survival in this patient population who on average have a poor survival of about a year to a year and a half. And so this was increased to 21.1 months of survival. One of the questions that's currently percolating within the medical oncology groups are, what is the utility of ipi-nivo combination immunotherapy, which has been so useful in patients with cutaneous melanoma, but is often quite disappointing in uveal melanoma. On the far left is a slide from a Spanish study looking at ipi-nivo. And in one of the big discussion sessions, educational sessions, Dr. Paul Nathan from the UK pointed out that if you look at the patients who on the clinical studies had ipi-nivo and had responses, the vast majority of those patients were patients who had disease outside of the liver, so that essentially the typical patient who has liver involvement, either liver only or extrahepatic plus liver involvement, that these patients, the response rates to ipi-nivo were disappointing and probably not necessarily better than single agent anti-PD-1. I think this just highlights the fact that we really do need to improve our treatments for patients. So along that line, there was a study called the Chopin study, which is a study looking at the percutaneous hepatic perfusion, or DELCAF. This is a procedure where uh, a basically the liver is isolated using a catheter that goes through a vein. And then the liver is basically bathed in chemotherapy, a drug called melphalan, and then is filtered out, and the blood is then returned to the patient. And this has Health Canada approval. It's also utilized in Europe. Unfortunately, sorry, I said Health Canada approval. That's incorrect. It has FDA approval and it's approved in Europe, but does not have Health Canada approval. But in any case, this promising treatment that's used in as a single approach was also used in a clinical study where patients received the Ipi-Nivo Light, the less intensive Ipi-Nivo regimen, as well as percutaneous hepatic perfusion, PHP. And patients were randomized between the two arms. They received 4 doses of Ipi-Nivo and only 2 doses of the PHP and received no further maintenance immunotherapy. And the overall progression free survival as well as overall survival was improved in these patients. Unfortunately, it's not a curative therapy. It buys patients time, but the combination of immunotherapy with PHP had very promising results. So there was improved survival at 1 year. There's overall survival and response rate improvement. And after patients go through this complicated regimen, they then have no further treatment and are able to be treatment free for in on average 6 months to a year. Um, the the uh, the uh, the combination therapy is, however, toxic. There's more side effects. And one of the questions at the site was, well, if combination immunotherapy isn't really that useful, would single agent immunotherapy be safer and also useful? And we just don't know the answer to that question. There was another study that looked at pembrolizumab plus a second drug called lenvatinib that's shown promise in non-uveal melanoma. The way this study was designed is that they basically predicted what the results might be and had benchmarks as to whether they could have disease control after with this combination treatment as a first-line agent. And there's a prediction that patients who've been treated with tebentafusp previously may have a better response, so they had a higher bar that needed to be met for that. Um, Again, this is not a home run. Patients are not cured of their cancer, but the control of the tumor was better than their minimum threshold for success. At 27 weeks, the progression-free survival was 31.8% in the TEBI naive patients, and in the patients who had Kimmtrak, 60% had their tumor controlled. So essentially, this combination is promising. It's a single arm. We don't know if it's better than other treatments, but it is encouraging that this type of treatment and mechanism of action may be useful. And then for the presidential session, the drug IMA 203, or I'm haven't yet learned how to pronounce this yet, so I will work on that next time. So the Immatics IMA 203 drug was presented at the presidential session. So this is a type of therapy called a TCRT therapy. Like tebentafusp, patients need to be HLA-A2 positive, but different from tebentafusp, it targets a protein called PRAME. And in this study, they used T cells that were engineered to be able to recognize the tumor cell, and then those T cells are infused after pretreatment with chemotherapy, and then patients receive a modest dose of interleukin-2 injections after the infusion of the cells. Oh, sorry, this is the patients have a leukapheresis where the white cells are engineered for Anzu-cel. The patients receive modest lymphodepletion, then receive the infusion, and then after that receive the treatment with IL-2 injections. So what was very exciting is that the overall response rate was 67%. It's a small study, only 15 patients, but encouraging results. And many of these responses have been durable. It's still early, but patients on the study are doing reasonably well with at least 11-month response length of the responses. And here's an example of a patient who had a tumor present, had prior therapy, had low burden of disease, hepatic only, with 2 target lesions, and received T cells and has had a very good ongoing response that continues to be patients in remission. So in terms of this treatment, there are expected cytopenias. It's very difficult with this question about cytokine release syndrome, which is a side effect of cell therapies. It can be confused with the effects of the IL-2 injections that are given afterwards, but in any case, patients tolerated the therapy well, and it's very promising for the future. So with that, we have a lot of exciting new things that are coming, and Allie and I can chat about options in the here and now and how these results impact future steps.
Certainly exciting to have even just multiple updates from one conference. I mean, we went years and years with no uveal melanoma updates. So it does kind of feel like there's a bit of a watershed moment where we're about to have all these new treatments.
Yeah.
Do you want to take us through, Dr. Butler, just the current standard, and then maybe we'll talk about how you see these newer agents coming into play?
Sure. So when a patient first of all, when a patient presents with an eye tumor, they need to have their primary therapy, and that might involve plaque brachytherapy. They may have to have their eye removed, or they may receive external beam radiation. And then in most parts of the country, people have access to some kind of test that can help identify patients who are at higher risk than or lower risk for developing metastases. And I think that is helpful because the patients with higher risk are patients that we can monitor more intensely and identify recurrences. When patients have recurrence, 90% of the time the liver is involved. Half of the time, those patients will have liver-only involvement, and the other half patients will have disease outside of the liver. And then 10% of patients have no hepatic disease, no liver disease, just disease outside of the liver. Currently, for patients that have lesions that are accessible for surgery or an ablation procedure, we'll often have those performed. In general, we think that if you have an early relapse, those types of approaches are less effective than patients who have late relapses. And like I said, Hepzato is not approved in Canada. However, there have been examples of patients who have requested access and have been provided coverage by their provincial agency for out-of-country treatment with Hepzato. That's typically patients will go to the US. There's the option of also going to Europe. And it's quite expensive and would be reserved for people that have liver-only disease, or if there is disease outside of the liver, it's easily dealt with resection or radiation or some other ablative procedure. And then for standard of care, if you need some kind of treatment, we give immunotherapy, immune checkpoint inhibitors that have such great results in cutaneous melanoma. And the discussion is whether to have combination ipilimumab and nivolumab versus single agent nivolumab or single agent pembrolizumab. And I think many of us, especially in academic centers, have a bias towards ipi-nivo. But I did sort of throw in that discussion point from Dr. Nathan because, you know, the reality is that most patients don't benefit from these treatments. And when you have have a treatment that has a side effect profile 60 to 70%, you know, it's a decision that we have to make every day when we have these conversations. And um, it's a difficult one because we don't have randomized data, so we're not 100% sure what the best option is. One of the conversations I recently had with a patient was, well, we can do one or two rounds of ipi-nivo. If you have side effects, stop. Don't go for the full four necessarily. And there's also some data from not for uveal, but there's other data that in cutaneous that maybe you don't need four treatments, you only need two. And if you limit to two treatments, there's less side effects. So, and that's kind of what we have as standard of care. In terms of clinical trials, right now for the primary tumors, there are a few slots that requires pharmacokinetics. It's like a bunch of blood draws after you take a couple of pills. But there is a neoadjuvant study that's ongoing for patients where they receive the pills to shrink the tumor before their plaque or enucleation. And in that study, there are a few additional slots left. That study will then close, and shortly thereafter, will open a randomized study. Uh, Eligibility criteria is a little bit more restricted, so not everyone will be eligible for it, and patients are randomized to either just straightforward therapy versus having the darovasertib treatment. In terms of metastatic disease, in terms of clinical trials, as you know, the darovasertib crizotinib study has basically filled. There are still some patients in screening, and so there's a wait list in case some of the patients don't get treated. And then we're going to be waiting for the results of that study, and hopefully it'll be positive, and then there will be a compassionate access. But I think we're going to have a year or so where we don't have access to that treatment. The exciting IMA 203 study for HLA-A2 positive patients. There is no access for that in Canada, but there are a few slots that are being added in US sites. So and it's after one round of treatment. So if you've had two rounds of different types of treatments, you're not eligible. So patients who've only had one line of therapy, tebentafusp, as an example, could be a line, or immunotherapy. They're eligible for that study. There are several sites in the US. They have very limited access, and I'm not even sure if there are any spots left, but especially after the presidential session, their presentation, there may not be any. I had one patient that tried to get on, but unfortunately it wasn't able to do that.
Presumably they're going to plan a larger
Well,
study
that's
down
a
the
great
road,
question. Yeah,
or
that's what I've been advocating for. We're bringing the IMA 203 study for cutaneous. There's also a randomized cutaneous trial. That is coming, and it's coming to Canada soon. And the company thinks they'll be able to get approval for uveal based on the cutaneous and so currently there are no plans to open uveal slots in Canada on that study. But, uh, when you go to bed, pray that the regulators make them do a bigger study so that we can have access. But yeah, I think it's a moving target. We're not sure what's going to happen. And then not presented at this meeting, but certainly is exciting, is a study with an oncolytic virus called RP2. Currently in the US, there's a randomized trial where patients are either getting combination ipi-nivo or anti-PD-1 therapy with an oncolytic virus injection called RP2. That's had some interesting, promising early results that are being investigated in the randomized setting. The biggest challenge for a Canadian trying to get that therapy at a US site is that the costs of ipi-nivo is so high, and I'm pretty sure since it's standard of care, they're expecting the patient to approve it, and most provincial insurance plans do not pay for any drugs administered on a clinical trial outside of Canada.
Do you have any inside information about Hepzato and a Health Canada, if they're going to try to get Health Canada approval and bring it to Canada?
So my inside, yeah, I've talked to I don't have any inside information. I haven't, I've, I've talked to the company and to people, and they're like, and no one, and basically the answer is there is no plan. Um, and then I remind them that we have patients that can utilize this therapy, and I remind them that a lot of people aren't comfortable traveling to the U.S. even if the treatment is paid for. But if you do travel, most provinces require that you also pay for your own hotel. It's quite expensive, all of the travel and pieces, even if the treatment itself, which is expensive, even if that's covered. So that if they open in Canada, there would be a market, especially as more and more encouraging results come. I think the one of the things that we're looking at is whether we can, open a clinical trial and show interest and that there's a market, and then maybe the company would do the work that's needed to open to bring it, because it requires, I mean, there is no submission in front of Health Canada, so um, it would require um, a whole big submission, and there's no guarantee that it would be ultimately covered. The clinical trial that was used to get approval in the FDA was a small trial, and they had trouble accruing because patients at the time, the drug was or the treatment was available in Germany and other European sites. So people would go on to the trial, get randomized to standard of care, and then hop on a plane and go to Europe. So they had trouble actually doing that trial. So it's not a huge trial. And when you have a small trial where the statistics are a little um, iffy, um, the regulators and the payer tends to be very um, uh, careful. But if we're able to show that insurance plans are willing to pay for it, then hopefully we can entice them to bring the therapy here.
I mean, it's interesting too, now that there's the studies of Hepzato with ipi-nivo versus Hepzato, and I believe there's another one of ipi-nivo, Hepzato versus ipi-nivo, and that would be interesting because if you can show that it's additive to what we're doing with the checkpoint inhibitors, there's even
Yeah,
more of
yeah, that's
a
what is
reason.
Candium 3 trial, I think. I think when I
Mhm.
described it, I may have described the Chopin study incorrectly. But in any case, you're reminding me there's that study, which I think will be really helpful. And actually, the Delcath people point out that FDA approval was actually they did a lot. They got a lot of the data from the Swedes in the Scandium study to help justify getting the PHP with melphalan approved. So I don't know. Honestly, I think we need to lobby the company and maybe even lobby the payer, or sorry, the regulator, the Health Canada, because there's a lot of confusion for this type of therapy. What is the right pathway for approval? Europe and the US have approved it, but they've approved it through different mechanisms. In Europe, it's a procedure, and that approval process is less vigorous than the approval process in the US, where it was approved as a drug. And I would suppose that if Canada aligns itself with Europe, then it might be quite feasible to get it approved.
And just to go back to standard of care, because you talked about the checkpoint inhibitors, but for the HLA-A*02:01 positive patients, of course, tebentafusp is what you're using, generally always first line.
Yeah, so yeah, and there wasn't really much update on Tebi, so they kind of and I forgot to mention it when I was discussing the options. So absolutely, Tebi is our first line therapy option that we give patients. In Ontario, it's actually not approved second line. So if a patient wanted to get immune checkpoint inhibitor and then try Tebi later, the province probably would say no to the Tebi. Um, there's there is some data with patients that have a rare mutation called MBD4 that immunotherapy might work like super well, and you can make an argument that those patients should get an immune checkpoint before having to get Tebi. But um, I haven't had a situation where next time I have one of these patients, I'm going to try and get a prior approval. I suspect Ontario will say no because they really try to follow the Canada's Drug Agency guidelines, and CDA is in love with large randomized trials. So, for rare cancers, it's challenging, and I think it just so highlights the need to think creatively for rare cancers as we try to figure out what's best for patients.
There are a couple questions in the chat. The first, I think you've kind of already touched on, but are there open trials recruiting for HLA negative patients in Toronto?
So right now, the only trial that we have is the darovasertib crizotinib first line study, and that study, if you've had no prior treatment, you would be put on a wait list. And I suspect at this juncture, there are no slots. I think most of the patients on the wait list, I think we've got more people on the wait list than slots will arrive. So, no is the answer for right.
Yeah, I have someone on that wait list and I think they're number 11 or something. Like it's quite a wait list at this point,
Yeah, yeah,
unfortunately. That was a very popular trial that
yeah.
accrued very quickly. And then the next question is, do you know what is happening with DYP 688 trial?
Great question. It So for patient advocates, the one of the things to push is big drug companies that develop treatments halfway. Novartis. Basically, Novartis has very promising results, and I think they're looking for somebody to license the drug and to develop it further. Um, I think we should be thankful that investment in this drug has occurred. It's has a rare indication, and the results that I've heard from patients and what's been presented is that it's pretty well tolerated and has activity. But I think basically the question is whether there's going to be a company to license the drug from Novartis and move it forward in development. Um, and I have heard some rumblings that that might happen, but I don't know other than that. And I think we're off. We're a couple of I suspect we are a couple of years away from further investigation of that drug.
And then lastly, there is a question about the Rogan-Alicid trial and if that might be coming to Canada.
Yeah, the uh, gr great question. It's always frustrating for me and for you, I know, to have a drug that's in the US and Europe and not included with us. Um, and that's the case for this one. They did not decide to come to Canada. Um, there is, I will mention in terms of other studies, there is the ATOM study, which is an adjuvant tebentafusp study where patients receive tebentafusp for half a year. It's a randomized trial to see whether we can prevent relapses. We're working on getting that study open in Princess Margaret. Um, that's a difficult one if you don't live in Southern Ontario because it's a weekly treatment. But it's only 6 months, and it's for patients who have high risk disease by cytogenetics or size. Um, that is currently enrolling in Europe. It's going to be opened at some US sites, and we're hoping to open it at Princess Margaret. It's being organized by the Cooperative European Group, EORTC.
Right? Okay. I mean, that's all the questions I think that I saw that came through. Is there anything you'd like to say as closing remarks, Dr. Butler?
No, I think it is an exciting time. I think it's going to be frustrating over the next couple of years because I think the next year for sure, we're gonna have a period where we know there's some promising results, but they're not accessible. So keep in contact with the tertiary care centers because when a compassionate access program becomes available, we'll know about it. And uh, you know, I think most people with rare cancers that live far away from the tertiary care centers should get their treatments close to home, but do keep in touch because things may change quickly, and we'll be happy to help.
Right? Okay. Well, thanks so much. Always lovely talking to you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you so much to both of you for a very deeply informative session and for answering all those questions. I know you both have very busy schedules, so please know everyone on this call and people that are going to watch it later really do appreciate you sharing your insights and answering those questions. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so we are going to keep moving forward with our next session. So that was a great session from our two doctors, but while medical treatment is one pillar of care, navigating the system and accessing support is another. So our next panel is really going to bring together the incredible voices from the front lines of patient support. So we have Michelle Blue, RN, an operational leader and oncology certified nurse who brings a system level perspective on improving cancer care. And we also have Marilyn McInnes, hopefully I'm saying that right, who is an RN from Cancer Care Alberta, and she'll be offering a direct insight from their work with patients and outpatient settings. And then finally, we'll have Kathy Bernard, our founder and president at Save Your Skin Foundation, who will share the dual perspective as a patient advocate and a melanoma survivor. We will begin with a 15-minute presentation from both Marilyn and Michelle on their roles and work, followed by a panel that Kathy will lead, discussing how, delving into kind of the multidisciplinary support team and real-world case studies and how all of us work together in this space. So I'm going to begin by giving the floor to Marilyn, and I'll stop sharing my screen here in case you need to share your screen, and then we'll go from there. So thank you so much for being here today, Marilyn.
Helps if I unmute myself. My apologies. So I was just texting, sorry, I had my phone out, texting Michelle. We're just running a few minutes early, so she will be hopping on right away. So I will chat first about the nursing role in patients with ocular melanoma. I'll talk a little bit I work in Edmonton, Alberta, as was mentioned. I'll talk a little bit about what my role is currently, what we've done to improve patient care within the Cross Cancer Institute, as well as what I would like to see in the future, kind of like a perfect world situation that I think would be helpful for improving patient care. So as I mentioned, I'm a nurse. I work mostly in cutaneous clinics, and in the last year or so, we've developed a specialized role for a triage coordinator for cutaneous cancers. In the past, the other tumor groups have had this role, and we felt that that was a missed opportunity. Previously, the physicians were the ones that would be triaging the referrals, and maybe a referral would come from your family doctor, and then you would get booked in a few weeks later, and then the scans that might be needed, or any kind of biopsies or lab work, especially like HLA typing, would be done at that point. And in Alberta, HLA typing does take 4 to 5 weeks. So that's a lot of time that we felt that we could work on and improve. So we've been successful in that. And Michelle is my manager, and she's been great for letting us kind of take that initiative and help to improve patient care at the Cross. So I'm very appreciative of that. So besides the triage role, in the nursing role in care of people with ocular melanoma, you might see us in clinic. In the Cross Cancer Institute, we would assess people, how they're feeling before treatment. But we're also in the background. A lot of our work actually happens outside of clinic environment. So we will often review charts for people coming into clinic and see if there's anything we can do to preemptively help navigate the system. So we might be looking at what happened at the last visit, and making sure to note that whoever the provider is seeing, that person offers, say, psychosocial supports, if that's something that we feel has not been offered to the patient in their last visit and that they could benefit from. We would also maybe provide in navigation or supports for outside support groups like Save Your Skin or Melanoma Canada. From a nursing role too at the Cross, sometimes we are the only provider that you may see in a clinic visit. We've developed through our great management nurse-led clinics where after going for lab work and you come to see the registered nurse for an assessment, and we have some guidelines and we use some evidence-based tools to ensure that it is safe to go ahead with therapy. So this is also a way that we're trying to improve access to treatment for patients by utilizing the multidisciplinary team. As far as triage, just to get an idea of what nurses' role is with with triage, and this is something, as I mentioned, we've developed more this year. We would get that referral from, in ocular melanoma, often our referral would be from our ophthalmologists. We have two in Alberta that would be seeing patients after their brachytherapy. So we would see patients that are either known to have disease that's spread to the liver or suspected liver or other organs. So in the past, these people would have gone to see the oncologist, and then the clock kind of started as far as going for your lab testing, the HLA testing, or if there wasn't a biopsy done yet, that's when the biopsy got ordered. So now we can do that on the front end, which is really great. We can, as soon as I get the referral, I will review it with the oncologist, and then I will say my plan based on reviewing what's information's available. And if the oncologist agrees with the plan proposed, then I will contact the patient to let them know what the plan is, ask them to go to lab in the community. In Alberta, you can be in Grand Prairie, which is very far north, and you can still get this lab test drawn. And then I let them know that the appointment will be coming in about 4 to 5 weeks. And I think this has been really helpful, being able to connect with the patient and just let you know that, we've got your referral, we're working on it. These are the steps that we've already taken. These are the steps that will be happening in the future. And also to be able to answer any questions that they may have. So then the patient will be seen in our new patient consult with the nurse and the physician. And then once a treatment plan has been determined, we will provide more written information. I think that's so important. You get a lot of information in your consult. And if we can provide anything that helps to kind of provide some clarity for that, what happened in that appointment, I'll often review too with the person coming in, what's your understanding of what the oncologist said today, to help to kind of review in a little bit more detail once the oncologist has left. And often that's when a lot of questions do come forward. And then I also encourage people to write any questions down when they get home, because like we were talking about, you can have a lot of information in one consultation, and it's very hard to remember all the things that you are still wondering about. So always good to write that down. Then after that, we might, nurses at our center will provide virtual support between appointments. We have what's called our telephone triage line, and that line is open 7 days a week, and it accesses registered nurses who would be able to provide symptom management, often some psychology or psychosocial supports. And also, if we have something that we're not able to help manage within our scope of practice, we would reach out to the nurse practitioner or the physician. So it's a really great service for those on treatment and those on surveillance. We also, within our tumor group, developed some virtual RN-led clinics, and we will preemptively call patients who have started on a new treatment, especially one that we know has a higher risk of side effects. And that's been a really great clinic. Us as providers really enjoy that, as we really get to know the people coming through our clinics, and we're able to provide the support. And often that's earlier on. If a side effect is to occur, we can provide that support earlier on and help that person continue on treatment by managing those side effects early on. So that kind of is what I was hoping to describe the nursing role a little bit in detail at our center. Now, if I had, a magic ability to make a perfect world nursing role, I think it would be really important that people could have improved navigation from diagnosis. So all the way from the first time seeing an ophthalmologist, or maybe it's an optometrist that notices a lesion in the eye, all the way through to treatment, and having a point of contact for these patients, I think would be really helpful in navigating the system. As well, I would love to be able to decrease the HLA typing, so the blood test that we send that can take 4 to 5 weeks. I would love to be able to have that decreased, that wait time decreased. I know that they are, more recently, there has been an effort to for more expedited testing that will tell us if someone is HLA negative quicker. But then if they're HLA positive, we need to still see what allele. So it can still take the 4 to 5 weeks. And then in a perfect world, also hoping that there's this navigator that helps from the very first diagnosis. They would also help to arrange a biopsy if needed. So often in the community, at least in our province, the ophthalmologists will often send the referral over to the cancer center, and that's not wrong by any means. But if we had a navigator, they could get started on some of this already, and it would just further improve care and further improve access for people. So that was what I wanted to kind of review about the nursing roles and ways that we can be more supportive for people. Michelle, I can let you go from an operational standpoint.
Perfect. Thanks, Marilyn. And hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I just wanted to build upon what Marilyn has already put forward and really look at the patient journey from an operational perspective. So really looking at the systems that support behind the scenes, I think can sometimes complicate the experience that Marilyn's described as well. So just again, for some context, that I'm speaking from an Albertan lens, but I do think that the themes really extend across Canada, really looking at coordinating care across regions, ensuring timely access, maintaining equity, and then planning for sustainability long term. So again, there's opportunities to do better there. Looking at a few key areas. So really, how do we look at the patient journey and navigating a complex system? Really looking at collaboration and what that looks like. I think national coordination and equitable access is also important. If we also look at the role of industry partners, and then finally, just I think wrapping up with some strategic planning to really help build a system that's not only effective, but I think resilient and people-centered as well. So starting and diving in, if we looked at the patient journey and really how do we navigate a complex system, as Marilyn described, in Alberta, we're striving to make real progress in improving how patients with melanoma, and specifically ocular melanoma, access and coordinate their care. So this means strengthening the referral processes, building clearer pathways between community providers and the tertiary centers, and really enhancing how the multidisciplinary teams collaborate. So ophthalmologists, oncologists, nurses, and allied health professionals are really trying to work in sync to guide each patient through diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up. We know, though, that the journey is rarely straightforward for patients, and I think rare cancers also create their own level of complexity. So if patients are often referred to different regions, there's sometimes coordination across provinces, and there's difficulty in accessing some of those specialized expertise. Patients may encounter delays in diagnostics, there's gaps in communication, and uncertainty about next steps. So for patients and families, we know that this can feel overwhelming, particularly when care is concentrated in really one or two national centers. So from an operations standpoint, I think our responsibility truly is to smooth some of those rough edges. And that means investing in infrastructure that supports timely access so referrals can move more quickly through the system without being lost in transition. It means building clear and standardized pathways that every provider can follow, reducing variation across sites and regions if possible, and improving communication systems so that patients don't have to repeat their story multiple times, and that providers have the same information at the same time. I think it's essential to consider how technology can help in that as well. So looking at shared electronic records, virtual consultations, and some digital navigation tools to help keep patients informed and connected, and even when their care spans across multiple different sites. If we move into collaboration next is kind of one of those key points to review. I think one of the most powerful tools we have is just that, it's collaboration. So if we look at collaboration between advocacy groups, clinicians, researchers, policymakers, and truly patients and families, I think that helps to strengthen the care that we do provide. So across Canada, I think we've seen how these partnerships can drive meaningful change, and advocacy has truly played a critical role in shining light on rare diseases. So pushing for better access to diagnostics, more equitable treatment options, and stronger psychosocial support is important. And when advocacy meets clinical expertise and then operational leadership, I think truly transformation can take place, and it is possible. So the collaborations help us see systems through multiple different lenses. Clinicians bring science and standards of care. I think operations, we try to bring structure and processes that make care delivery sustainable. Advocacy groups bring the lived experience, the human perspective, and I think patients bring the voice that connects truly all of that together. So if we are able to co-design a system, I think it's part of this work. And across the country, health systems, I think, are starting to partner directly with patients and community organizations to really help drive change, to develop resources and streamline some of those navigational pieces. So co-design is about creating the resources with patients and families. And I think this shift ensures that we build on practical, accessible, and truly supportive care. The efforts empower people to ask questions as well, which is important, seek support and feel confident moving through their care journey. And empowerment is so important, as I think that extends beyond medical understanding, but also helps to build resilience and connection. So I think when patients feel informed and included, it really helps to shape our system for the better. If we look at now the role of industry partners, which is important in the work that I do, again, we're talking about collaboration, but we're also talking about partnerships and what that looks like. So industry truly has a role in improving care for people with rare diseases, and that's vital for us. So beyond developing new treatments, it's taking the time to understand what patients experience day to day, and then working closely with health systems to make sure that those innovations actually reach the people they were designed to reach. And from an operations perspective, every new therapy, I think, brings hope, but also responsibility. So we have to make sure that our system is truly ready to accept those new treatment options. And that means training nurses and staff so that they feel confident in delivering new treatments, but it also means developing capacity in our centers. So access is not dependent on where a patient lives. It means thinking about equity, sustainability right from the start. So how do we build that into these new treatment plans? And industry can also be a powerful ally in this by sharing expertise, supporting education, and helping to strengthen infrastructure. These partnerships really make it possible to turn scientific progress into real tangible care. So when industry, clinicians, and health systems come together, I think we are able to really truly move innovation forward and have a real impact on people's lives. Next, looking at the equity and access piece. One of the biggest challenges I think that we face across Canada is how fragmented care can be. We are a large landmass and care is sporadic throughout the country. So how do we dictate how and where patients receive care? So where a patient lives too often determines what kind of care they actually receive. And those in major cities may have access to specialists, diagnostic tools, and clinical trials, where people in rural or remote communities may face long trips, fewer options, and delays. So in an ideal world, I think every patient would have timely access to care. That means diagnosis, treatment, and supports just to help them cope and recover. So reaching that goal will take more than good intentions, and we know that. I think it means coordinating care pathways at a national level, truly building on shared data and referral systems that connect the provinces and providers if possible. It also means investing in local and regional capacity so that patients can get care closer to home, and then strengthening collaboration across provincial borders. Looking now at, I think, some of the mental health and psychosocial supports that we need, and part of what I consider from an operational perspective. I think one of the biggest challenges, again, that we face is how fragmented care can be. So patient experience can vary dramatically dependent on geography. So those in major cities have easier access often to, like I said, specialists in diagnostics and clinical trials. But again, those outside of experience their own set of challenges. And so there's uncertainty in navigating a complex system, and it's not always connected. And that's part of what Marilyn mentioned too with those navigational pieces. So we know that cancer does not respect postal codes. It doesn't wait for somebody to find the right referral or make it to the right center. So we need to help create that quality and timeliness of care and help to develop the structure to support that. So in an ideal world, every patient would have access to early diagnosis, specialized treatment, and ongoing support closer to home. So getting there requires structure, alignment, and I think a commitment across the entire healthcare system. So if we look at that, what that could potentially look like is that national coordination of care pathways. And this just helps to ensure that patients don't fall through the cracks between jurisdictions or the different centers. If we're looking at shared data and referral systems, again, that just helps to allow information to flow a little bit better. Investment in regional capacity, so ensuring specialized expertise isn't necessarily confined to a handful of urban centers, and supporting local teams through training, technology, and partnerships just to help with that specialized care. And if we look at cross-provincial collaboration, I think that means removing barriers to access. So patient journeys can follow the best path and not necessarily the easiest one. And we know, and I am very well aware, that this is not simply a logistical issue. It's a question of fairness, equity, and truly justice, and looking at having a responsibility to build a system that reflects values we hold. So really, we have to look beyond just those borders. And then strategic thinking into the future. So if we're looking ahead, I think it's important to think strategically about what comes next and how do we build this out. So we need to build a system that is sustainable, scalable, and truly responsive to the needs of patients and providers. So we know that healthcare doesn't change easily, and we know that it takes time, commitment, and resources. So building something better means investing not just in technology or infrastructure, but also in people, building relationships, and truly trust. So the challenges are real. We know that budgets are limited, that there's workforce shortages, and that constant balancing act between immediate pressures and then truly that long-term planning. But I don't think it's insurmountable either. I just think it takes a collaborative effort to move this forward. So some of the priorities, I think, for helping to shape that future work, if we look at workforce planning, we need to make sure that they're the right people in the right places with the right skills. So we need nurses, navigators, and specialists who can meet the growing and increasingly complex patient needs. And this means investing in recruitment, retention, and training. If we look at infrastructure investment, I think it's looking beyond just building capacity in the major centers, but also creating that access closer to home. And so that involves upgrading facilities, building regional hubs, and ensuring specialized care isn't concentrated in just a few locations. Again, a bigger ask and one that is not always easily attainable. If we're building and looking at digital tools, so technology doesn't replace human connection, but it can help to make sure that people are more connected, and that sharing of information is truly important. We also look at patient empowerment, so a strong system listens to patients, not just treats them. So we need to make sure that people feel informed, supported, and heard at every stage of their journey. And then finally, just looking at the work that's being done is not only treating a disease, it's about designing a system that works for people and really seeing the person as a whole and not just the diagnosis. And we won't get there overnight, but I think if we stay focused and if we keep patients at the center of this ideal, and we're willing to invest the time and resources to make that change, I do think that we can build a better healthcare system to help deliver better outcomes. And that's my perspective for now. I'll pass it over.
Wow, thank you to you both. Firstly, I need to thank you for participating today because I know I've taken you away from your patients, and quite clearly, you're both very committed to the patients that you look after. But secondly, I always want to thank nurses because I think every patient on this call today or Zoom meeting today would agree that you are so instrumental in our care. I cannot stress that enough. When we do our surveys, our patient surveys, asking them, what it was like to be diagnosed, what was like during their care, the one demographic that sticks out is that nursing staff and the empathy and the care that you give us. And we have patients that are in the cutaneous melanoma space 10 and 15 years out, and they still go for coffee with the nurse that they connected with at diagnoses. Like, you really, honestly, I can't stress it enough, how instrumental you are. And that's why it was really important for us to make sure you were included in this symposium today, because what we do know is that at Save Your Skin, we work with the same three pillars, right? Our patients come first, our healthcare professionals come second, and our partners are third. And if we aren't collaborating and navigating this system together, there won't be change within the system. And I'll tell you, 20 years ago, excuse me, there were not nurse navigators. And it was the first thing that patients were asking us when they were diagnosed. Why do we not have a nurse that's walking us or helping us through this system, right? Most Canadians don't even know how the system works. We think when we live in Canada, we have a Canadian healthcare system, and whatever ocular melanoma patients are getting in Ontario, certainly they should be getting them in British Columbia. I don't think patients understand how the system works until we're in that system. 20 years ago in the melanoma system, it was very similar to our uveal patients now. We had very little access to any drug. Most of the clinical trials were still only accessible in the US. And when we started advocating to get centers in Canada to open up some compassionate access or clinical trial, it was only in the provinces of centers of excellence, which I didn't even know there was such a thing. I live in British Columbia, thought I lived with the Center of Excellence at the BC Cancer Centre, but I had to come into Alberta. I had to navigate that entire process myself, which was, for my mental health, was really, really difficult. And that's really, most of you know why we started Save Your Skin Foundation, and now we're doing Ocumel Canada. We know for our uveal patients right now, in this moment, there is 1.5, 2 centers of excellence at best, and we have to start moving those patients as quickly as we can into those systems and those centers of excellence. I'm happy to say, though, the whole nurse navigation piece, you just spoke to what you have in Alberta, and it's amazing, but we now are seeing that across the country. So that in itself for a patient is unbelievably important. Even if we can't get the treatment we need within our home province, now we're seeing that our nurse navigators in Manitoba are connecting with the Marilyn and Michelle in Alberta and helping us seamlessly from your perspective move those patients, because there's a whole lot behind the scenes that you have to do. But where we can come in and why it's so, so important, and Michelle, you spoke to this, for us as a patient advocacy group, and for a patient who had to pay for drug, go to get drug, and navigate that on their own, we promise that to our patients that they won't fall into the abyss. If they aren't hooked with a nurse navigator in their province, they can come to us and we will find them for them. So that's why it's even important that we're always connecting, because, there's a lot of turnover in the healthcare system. And, sometimes we've got this amazing connect in a province and then somehow we lose that connect. So I think even for us, trying to figure out how we keep our dialogue and our partnerships going across Canada is going to be super important. But you need to know we're here, because every dollar we raise goes right back to moving those patients. And right now in the uveal setting, we are moving patients from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, over either to you or into Ontario. We're moving most of our Atlantic patients into Ontario or into Quebec, which right now is getting some access. So I can't stress enough how important it is that we are always connecting. If we do have industry on this call, and I think we have a couple, I think this really speaks to the importance of how nurses need to be at those ad boards alongside a patient advocacy group when they're about to start seeing some of their product come into our country, and not the week before they're going to send it for, to the federal government for NCO. They need, or NOC, they need to be bringing us into the conversation long before that, because we truly are hearing from the patients and we truly know what the needs of the patients are moving forward. And I think that only helps our partners be able to make a very justified case for why we need access for our patients in this country. And I think it's probably more even important in uveal than it maybe was in cutaneous in those early days, because uveal is such a small subset of patients. And what we do know sometimes in those rare cancers is sometimes those patients will fall behind. I know all of this won't happen overnight, but I am now at 23 years of survivorship from my 6 months deadline. And I've already seen the changes across the country in the system. So I will never underestimate what the power of not just one voice, but all of our voices can be in a healthcare system. I still am really nervous and worried about those very rural communities. But I've seen some magic happen there. You guys have done that in Edmonton, where you sent a couple of your physicians up to Yellowknife. So we are not bringing those patients to you. You are taking care to them. I mean, and there's a lot of other things like that happening across the country. And I think it's, up to Save Your Skin and Ocumel Canada to be showcasing some of those, because we never need to reinvent the wheel. If something great is happening in one of our provinces, let's share it with the rest. And that way we can hopefully get, what was your goal, is to have a navigator from the time of diagnosis through to treatment. I would love if we could keep that navigator beyond treatment and into survivorship. I know that right now is a little early of a discussion for our uveal patients, because we've got to get them there, and we will. We are all dedicated to working hard to get more compassionate access, more clinical trials into Canada, and not just into one province, as many provinces we can, because we all know as patients that we have better outcomes when we are close to our support systems, and our support systems are in our hometowns. And the closer we can get patients back home and the faster we can move them back, hopefully the better the outcomes will be. So we at Save Your Skin have the same hopes and dreams that you do for our patients, but we also know that we can be instrumental in making that happen. I always say it never hurts to ask. And we ask for a lot of things at Save Your Skin, and we bring granted a lot of things. So again, I can't stress enough how important you are. I think the realities of financial constraints is becoming a big conversation. The Canadian Cancer Society just talked about financial toxicity in cancer. I've known about that for 20 years because it cost my family and I, well into the, $150,000 to $200,000 range to get me better and to where I am today. And I just can't imagine that that's how we're looked after in our country. I know we've got a lot of uveal patients now that are crossing into the US, and Dr. Butler and Dr. Weppler talked about the huge financial toxicity to that to patients. So honestly, I can't thank you enough for the work you do. Please know that we are here at Save Your Skin and Ocumel Canada. And I just wonder if any of our patients on the line had any questions of these two amazing nurses before we end this session. I think we're all good. I don't see anything in the chat. Jasmine, we will pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much to Kathy, Marilyn, and Michelle. I am just going to share my screen real quick here with everyone on the line. Okay, so we are going to jump into a discussion now with Kathy and Nigel. So I do ask both of them to join the line here and turn on their lovely cameras if they can. And they're going to discuss with you all kind of like an open floor discussion on the opportunities that we are going to probably dive into for Ocumel Canada the next year. Any questions that you might have and dive into that a little deeper. So we have this conversation now, and I see both of them are on the line. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can have both speakers on, and I'll let them dive into it. Thank you so much both for participating on this call today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Nigel, I'm kind of glad we're up now because, you and I talked to this a little bit, how even our diagnoses were a little bit different and how we ended up navigating the system, right? And I guess it really speaks to what our healthcare systems across this country are starting to look like now. I think more patients and more patient advocacy groups have been asking for more navigation within the system because 20 years ago, really even 15 years ago, we were kind of in it on our own and having to navigate a system that we really fully didn't understand. And I know when you opened the session yesterday, you talked about the amazing care and navigation you got from, you know, everybody throughout the last 15 years with your diagnoses, right?
Absolutely. Hello to everybody. We hope that you're joining in. We're very interested in hearing what's on your minds. That's an important part of this session. I couldn't agree more. In a way, it's a frustrating time for ocular melanoma patients, because we've heard this morning from our experts that there are some amazing therapies just on the horizon, but that's where they are for now. It's very difficult for us to access them. But at the same time, to be in a situation where all uveal patients who are HLA-A*02:01 positive can go onto Kimmtrak very close to their homes, that's incredible progress. It's very hard to describe how important that is. And again, that's only half of us. But we also know for the other half, in the centers that treat ocular melanoma patients, if they're not HLA-A*02:01 positive, they do have access, I think in almost all cases, to combination immunotherapy. And that's a good place as we look to ways to get patients to these new therapies that are just out of reach at the moment.
Yeah, it does. It reminds me of, 20 years ago when, the drugs coming into the cutaneous were on the horizon, and we were all patiently waiting for them to come into a center of excellence near us. And it took a minute, and it takes a minute. And, that I think that's the hardest part for us as patients is the wait. Right. And I know we have patients that are able, maybe financially, to get into the US, but that's not a perfect scenario for them either. And it worries me a little bit. I know Marcus did talk, Dr. Butler did talk about a couple of occasions where he's had patients go into the US where the Ontario government has picked up the cost, but those are still few and far between. I know right now we do have a couple of patients in BC that we are hoping to get into the US for some compassionate access. But again, right, getting that reimbursement from our provincial government is very, very difficult. So I don't know. I think it still talks of the importance, though, of our patients making sure they're reaching out to us, right, at every juncture, so we can see what we can do to move things along. And Marilyn and Michelle, I know you're both still on here, but I think that really still talks to the importance of the dialogue with not only the multidisciplinary teams that are looking after us, but with the patient organizations as well. We've been able to make some things happen very well as patient advocacy groups. I know, Nigel, you and I knew that when the TEBI came to Canada. When it first came in, it was going to be in Ontario only. And Nigel and I met with Dr. Butler and with the drug company and said, this just doesn't work because we're having to move all patients from, their support systems and their home to Ontario. And it wasn't like they would go every 21 days for an infusion. They were going and relocating. And we had patients that were there for 3 and 4 months before we could start moving them back. And our ask, Nigel, you remember at the time, was please give us at least 4 centers of excellence. We thought if we could have BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, that it would at least make it a little bit easier for us to relocate patients. But I think we ended up with 16 centers within 6 months. So sometimes those communications between nurses and our physicians and our decision makers and our partners is instrumental in making that success happen. So I hope patients don't just reach out to us when things are going well. We really want you to reach out to us when they're not going well, to let us know what it is that maybe we can do behind the scenes to see if we can get things moving a little bit quicker for you.
Yeah, I see that one of our people is expressing frustration that other countries are getting clinical trials before us. And, of course, if you are ill and your disease is progressing, it's now that you need help. In terms of that are developing these therapies, they're very interested in the biggest markets. And that's just the reality. It's a business proposition for them. For us, it's trying to stay alive. And our population is tiny. We're a very small market. That's why you hear them saying, oh, the trials are open in Europe. The trials are open in the United States. The United States has 350 million people. Europe has 700 million people. That's where the big markets are. But it's very much our job, Save Your Skin and Ocumel Canada, to advocate for those of us who live here. There are many good things about living in Canada, but one of the problems is our very small population, our enormous geography, 9,000 kilometers from coast to coast. But we guarantee that if you reach out and we know what your frustration is, what your need is, we'll do everything in our power to help.
And I think it's important for us. We do sit on a number of global coalitions with other patient advocacy groups from the US, Europe, and beyond. And sometimes I question if there's a need for us to be there, but I'm reminded that there always is, because even though it feels like we're the last sometimes to get some of these clinical trials and compassionate access, I think it's important that we showcase the amazing work we do in Canada, because even though our system isn't perfect, we have opportunities as patients in Canada that they don't have anywhere else in the world. Right? We have a process where once that drug comes to Canada, we can usually work with farm partners to negotiate with our doctors and our nurses to see if we can advocate for more access for them, right? So instead of bringing in 15 patients into a study, maybe we can advocate to have 20, 25 to maybe see if we can open up access. We can also work with those farm partners to remind them what Canada does bring to the table. Once that drug comes into Canada, we are a big part, and all of our patients know that, because you see surveys coming from us literally lately, fast and furiously, because we do get an opportunity to have our voice heard, right? So we need to make sure that these new companies that are coming into the uveal space know all about our work and our amazing work that we do as patients, and collaborations with our nurses and our HTAs. We need them to know that, so that they do think of Canada when they're starting to come in, right? I mean, we are even making sure that we showcase doctors like Dr. Butler and Dr. Weppler, and there's many more of them in Canada that are doing amazing work for our patients in this space. So any opportunities that we are given at Save Your Skin to present at a global level, we're taking our physicians with us. We need the world to see that we are not a small market share. We are a very big player in patient advocacy right across the board. And I think it's really important they know that, because I can tell you, on all those global coalitions that I sit, they have taken pieces of our work in Canada and with Save Your Skin that they have showcased when they've been going to get a drug approved in Australia or in Europe or wherever in the world, Italy. So I think all collaborations are so important, whether it's within your province, within your country, and sometimes even beyond. But I think we've been able to do that, that, Nigel, in the cutaneous space. In those early days, all those treatments were on the horizon. We now have them in a neoadjuvant setting, and that wouldn't have happened without patients starting to survive and patients having their voice heard. So, and when we lost patients, we would stay in touch with their caregivers because their voice is just as important sometimes as the patient voice. So it's a tough journey in our system. We know that, but we're sure thankful now that we have the Marilyns and the Michelles to at least help us in the back end of that journey as well, right? Because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah. It might be worth mentioning too, Kathy, I know you're just back from Europe yourself and several important conferences and meetings. We heard Dr. Butler talk about his ongoing conversations with Delcath about PHP. You too have had conversations, and although there seems to be very a reticent approach from the company, it might be worth thinking of how we can collectively, all of the uveal melanoma patients across Canada express our interest in having access to this therapy that's proven. It was approved in Europe 10 years ago. The evidence that it helps is now there, and that's the kind of work we can do, look at the studies, etc., and document how important this is, but have the voice of the patients behind us in approaching the company directly and saying, it's not just doctors, it's not just Save Your Skin or Ocumel Canada who are interested in this and advocating this. It's all of these patients who really want to have that as an option at some stage in their disease, maybe right now.
Well, that's actually, I have to be honest, that's why I traveled to Amsterdam, because MRF, the US group, Melanoma Research Foundation, runs CureOM, and they held their symposium there. And when I got a list of who all the players were that were going to be there, it was a no-brainer for me that I had to jump on the plane. So I can tell, patients now that we have had a meeting in Amsterdam with Delcath. So we've had those beginning conversations, and we are going to be touching base probably within the next couple of weeks. We also have had conversations with IDEA. We were very fortunate to be invited to present to Servier Canada, who hopefully we're going to see in this space soon. So we have follow-up meetings before end of year with them. As well as Immunocore. We have worked with them, a lot with medicine in the TEBI, and we're continuing our conversations with them. And we also, when we were in Amsterdam, met with Castle Biosciences because Marcus touched on the testing, right? And how in some provinces, I know in Alberta, that testing is done for free. And in other provinces, patients are paying for that, and it's not cheap. So we've met with Castle, and we're going to be talking to them again. Their testing has expanded beyond just the uveal. They're now doing testing in cutaneous. So we're going to be meeting with them in the next, before end of year, to see how we can start getting that testing firstly funded in every province so that patients aren't picking up the cost. And I think Michelle spoke a little bit to it too. We want all those tests done in a more timely fashion. That was a big hurdle we had in cutaneous in 2011 when we got the first targeted drug there. So we all had to be tested for the BRAF mutation, and it was taking 6 to 7 weeks to get those test results back. That was just unacceptable. In cutaneous now, in most of our centers, we're getting those tests back within 2 to 3 days. So we all know the sooner we can be diagnosed, the sooner doctors and our nurses and our patients can make an informed decision on what type of treatment options they need. But we're always asking questions. I'm always asking my doctors for the patients that had TEBI that were eligible and then moved into the Ipi-Nivo combo, right? If there's still progression after that, can we not re-challenge the TEBI? We've seen in Europe that they've done that, and there's been some good data come out of that. So again, I always say to the patients, there is never a ask too big or too small, because we do have some connections beyond, just our patients that we can take those questions and maybe have answered for you.
I do see a question in as to what PHP is, and I'm sorry for using acronyms. I try really hard not to do that. So it's a percutaneous hepatic perfusion, and Delcath is the company that has, for many years now been developing a system that's becoming really useful to uveal melanoma patients. We don't have access at the moment. You've heard us discussing it now, but you can read a little bit about it now that you know what the letters stand for. And Kathy, I just want to, you mentioned the prognostic testing at the time of first treatment for primary disease. And I mentioned it yesterday that it's a standard of care, but you're right, in some places, some centers, you may be told that you have to pay for it. It's obvious that any patient diagnosed with uveal melanoma should have prognostic testing at the time of treatment. And if you're told that you have to pay for it, please be in touch so that we can help out and advocate on your behalf. We have relationships with both the Canadian company that does the testing and with Castle Biosciences, as Kathy mentioned. The hurdle for us there is that, we're thinking of new patients, and so they may not know that we exist or the work that we do. So, but sometimes there's communication amongst patients at the centers. So if you hear of a person who's newly diagnosed, who's about to have their first treatment, please mention that biopsy is essential now because it helps to plan for your future care, how much scanning you should have. You'll end up understanding your risk of developing metastasis, whether you're high risk or low risk. So if you can help us out at all in reaching new patients that you hear about while you're actually in the centers or online in any of the groups, please encourage them to ask for that. And if there's a barrier to it, let us know.
Yeah, and that just goes back to actually what we can do at Save Your Skin, right? Please reach out to us. We have our 1-800 number. Most of you know I picked that up 24/7 because I was the patient that had no 1-800 number and know how hard it was for me and my family to get through those diagnosis days. So please reach out to us. Again, all the funds that we raise through our events and our initiatives go directly to patients. It's there for whatever we need it to be there for. So if we need to get you to some compassionate access in Ontario or Alberta, just give us a call. We'll help navigate. We'll work with Michelle and Marilyn and the navigating nurses in your province to move you as seamlessly as we can, and we can do that. We do have great relationships with all the treaters in Canada. We actually lead with Dr. Butler, the Ocular Melanoma Task Force of Physicians. So we will be meeting with them again at the end of the month. Some of them weren't able to attend ESMO or SMR. So we're going to hopefully have Marcus update them on some of, the newer things coming. But again, never underestimate the power of the patient. I can't stress that enough. We have connections right from the federal health minister's office to every provincial leader, I think, in this country. Nigel, you know that, to every cancer center. I think I'm very proud of the reputation and the work that we do. If patients reach out to us whenever they need to, we can generally touch base with somebody that's within their care and see if we can get them an answer, see if we can move them. We do work very closely, I should stress this too, with the doctors in the US. They know us very well down there. When we started Save Your Skin, our medical board of advisory was made up of Dr. Michael Smiley from the Cross in Edmonton, and then all of the rest of the oncologists were from the US that were treating in cutaneous. They now treat in uveal as well. So we kept those relationships going. So if in the event your doctor in Canada sees the need to move you into the US, they will contact us, or you can contact us, and we'll make sure that the doctors are connected, the nursing staff is connected, and that we make that as seamless for you as we can. And also, we will try to see if we can get your province to pick up some of those costs. We're trying to help a patient right now, see if we can pick up some of the costs from BC. that she's going to be foreseeing in California. So again, hotels, whatever, anything you need from us, please reach out.
Super. So yes, the answer to the question about HEPZATO is that HEPZATO refers to the kit and PHP refers to the technique. So that is the same thing. Kath, I think it's just great that you mentioned, you know, that we should have what the oncologist thinks we should have. And so it seems as if darovasertib is very close to being within reach for us on compassionate access. So let's hope that's months and not years away. And let's also hope that you know, the providing company, and I know you've been in touch and you plan more contact, Kathy, soon, that the access will not be restricted, that it's this kind of patient who can get it on compassionate access or that kind of patient, that our oncologists, who are world class, would make a decision as to whether it would help us or not.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes, honestly, I think we're ready to close it up. And I kind of wanted to go back to a little bit about Marilyn, what Marilyn and Michelle were saying, you know, in our perfect world, right? For me, I think, and from what we hear from patients, getting treatments into Canada faster is number one. Getting them closer to where we live is number two. I think having a navigation system, an improved navigation system, right from diagnosis to treatment and beyond, is a must. I think making sure that we get those tests covered for patients across this country and that we're getting the results back in a timely fashion is important. So I think Marilyn, Michelle, and I probably have the same wish list heading to Santa this year. And you know, hopefully 2026 is going to be a better year for our uveal patients. And, you know, please don't ever give up hope. In 2003, when I was diagnosed, I was given 6 months and with no treatment options and no navigation. And it's not only me that's alive today, my good friend Nigel still is. So please don't give up hope, but know that if you need anything, you call that 1-800 number or my cell. It's on our website, and I will do my very best to make this journey for you as seamless as I can.
Thanks, Kathy. That's splendid. I don't have anything to add except that I've always believed that Santa is Canadian.
Is that because he wears red and white?
And lives at the North Pole.
Oh, there you go. Back to you, Jasmine.
Thank you both for a great panel discussion there. And I love the little tidbit of Santa Claus being Canadian. I always thought that as well. Honestly, I'm like, that makes sense. So a huge thank you, of course, to Kathy and Nigel for facilitating that discussion, and to all our speakers so far for their generosity and their wisdom and joining us here today. So as you all know, it's been a dense and emotional 2 days, and there has been a lot of information, and we really want to offer a moment to decompress and center ourselves after hearing all of that incredible information. So I do ask you to please join me in welcoming Leanne Westy, our wellness support consultant at Save Your Skin. Leanne will guide us through a short mindfulness session to support your well-being as well as conclude our call today. So thank you so much. I will stop sharing my screen, and Leanne, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Jasmine. If it's okay, I'm going to share just a little bit of information. First, I am going to share my screen. This is such a powerful space to be in, and my intention today is to bring in a mindful compassion practice. And as I'm doing that, as we're introducing that practice, I want to just share why the research, and hopefully, Jasmine, my screen is showing some of the evidence around how mindful compassion, the skill of mindful compassion and the practice of mindful compassion can be helpful. And I have purposely included for cancer patients, for caregivers, for care professionals, Because as we've seen here today and yesterday, this is an entire community, right? This is an entire community whose well-being is important if we're going to continue to bring care. We're going to continue to support. So in some of the research in these mindfulness and compassion-based skills for cancer patients, there's evidence of better quality of life scores, reduced stress, and reduced fear of occurrence. And again, so this is where they've been given instruction on how to do compassion practice, and then research on change after these practices, decreases in depression, anxiety, and perceived stress, improved coping and life outcomes and outlook. Mindfulness during chemotherapy showed a reduction in cortisol levels, improved sleep and less sleep disturbance, reduced pain intensity or pain interference in patient-reported measures, right? So really positive reasons for these compassion practices. For caregivers, for those that are in support of patients, reduction in caregiver anxiety and stress, improvement in caregiver psychological well-being, self-compassion training, increased overall measures of self-compassion. So again, that building of this skill of self-compassion, improved coping and life outlook, strengthened emotional regulation and coping, lower perceived burden, improved sleep, and some evidence of reduced cortisol and reduced inflammation in the body. And even in the dyads, when they did compassion training between caregiver and patient, what they saw was this reduction in distress and improvement in the relationship. And our care professionals, we've heard from so many over the last 2 days, and we need our care professionals to be well. We need when you're working in a space where there is suffering and when there is pain and uncertainty, we've heard over the past couple of days, we want to make sure our care professionals are taking care of themselves as well. And lots of evidence in the compassion research for decreases in burnout and secondary trauma symptoms, protection against compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, increased strength and resilience, professional identity. It mediates lower compassion fatigue, reduced stress, anxiety, burnout indicators, strengthened emotional regulation and coping, improved well-being, reduced distress, and improved heart rate variability after intervention from a smartphone. So some of these apps that help us. And again, at the whole system, we really want to be caring for and supporting, which is what we heard over the last 2 days. So why mindful self-compassion? And we're going to move into a practice, but even as I'm explaining the skill, some background on why this skill is so important, I want to maybe invite you to walk through with me. And the reason that I brought mindful self-compassion into the space is the tension that's held in this space. And before I explain these places, there is tension here where there is pain and there is possibility, where there is suffering and there is hope, noticing how we hold that tension, noticing throughout the workshop or the symposium for the last 2 days, this back and forth between possibility and then the pain that is underlying the need for that possibility and the need for that hope. And so I just wanted to name some of those places that I noticed. I'm going to invite you to consider this as well. That at the beginning we heard from Nigel, and we heard the hope and the possibility, the survivorship, Nigel's journey. And then we had to hold that tension of grief as Nigel named and honored individuals from this community that are no longer with us. Right? So we're holding possibility and we're holding pain. In Dr. Krima's presentations, we saw all the possibilities for surgeries and treatments, and as well as scary to see those. It's hard to know that those treatments, we have to go through those treatments. So we're again holding possibility with pain. And then we heard from Dr. Butler, you would have heard it's encouraging, there's possibility, there's excitement, there's options, there's all these availabilities, and there's frustration, there's disappointment, there's accessibility issues, there's time concerns, so this back and forth. And today, hearing from Marilyn and Michelle, can you hear the advocacy and the commitment to care in systems where there's still frustration over cohesion and collaboration, and yet there's possibilities in this system. There's people advocating, right? So in a space where there's suffering, there's hope. And the reason for compassion practices is to invite us to be with both, to be with both. And so I want to introduce, this is from Dr. Kristen Neff's work. There's the Mindfulness Self-Compassion Institute. There's many different practices, but here's the one that I want to introduce us to today and to invite you to join me. And first, we're going to look at it a bit more globally in the symposium, and then I'm going to invite you to turn this practice toward yourself as we come to close. So there's three main components to compassion and to self-compassion. And as I've named here, this tension between suffering and that mobilization of care. And so the first piece in compassion is acknowledging that there is suffering, mindfully turning towards and acknowledging that this is hard, that what you're going through is difficult, right? And again, just inviting you to consider just gently where you might have noticed that in the symposium. We're going to look outwards first, and then we're going to turn inwards. So just noticing if you could notice in the last 2 days some of those places where you noticed that there was pain, that there was difficulty or challenge, maybe as a patient, as a caregiver, as someone working in the industry. That there is difficulty, there's challenge here, and that is true. And some position to name this. This is hard. This is frustrating. There is difficulty in the system. There is inaccessibility. Where you notice that. And then the second piece is around common humanity. Suffering and pain are part of the human experience. You are not alone in experiencing this. It's normal to feel pain. It's normal to go through difficult things, and you're not alone. And I invite you here again to see if you can notice, even over the past 2 days, or if you're joining us just today, recognition that you are not alone in this. There are others who can understand what you're going through. And your unique experience, the way in which this is unfolding for you, again, as patient or caregiver or care provider, might have a slightly different flavor, but there are others who understand. There are others who are here. There's a community. You are not alone. And pain can be very isolating. And so compassion invites us to remember this connectedness, this shared space of understanding. And so just taking a moment, see if you can notice, again, if you're here today or you've been here both days, where you saw that shared humanity. That space that you are not alone, that there are others that understand and are here with you. And then the third piece of compassion is this mobilization of care, of kindness, this deep wish to meet suffering with care, intentionally and purposely, that when we're going through difficult things, that we want to meet ourselves with care, and we want to meet ourselves with compassion, we want to meet ourselves with kindness. And so in the symposium over the past 2 days, we saw so many examples of care and kindness being mobilized to meet pain, to meet suffering. And so I want to invite you to just take a moment and notice where that care was present, where you noticed it, where you noticed the kindness, the intention to meet that pain. So many layers. You may have noticed it in advocacy. You may have noticed it in the powerful intention behind building resource and building systems that we heard from Marilyn and Michelle. You might have heard it in the possibilities for treatments and the excitement of unfolding of these different treatments and the research that's going on behind the scenes, all mobilizing to meet pain with care. And really giving ourselves permission to notice this care. That we're not denying or suppressing or over-identifying with the suffering. We're not denying or missing out on the opportunities to notice and engage with the care. And so really giving some permission to be in that tension. Notice the suffering and noticing the kindness. And so for the last, we're going to do about a 8-minute practice within this framework, within this recognition of difficulty, this shared humanity, this mobilization of care and kindness to meet suffering. I'm going to invite you into a practice that's going to be a bit more personal. We're going to turn towards your individual experience. And first, when we do that, whenever we're going to move into a practice, the invitation is to really notice and be in this moment. So in all the places our mind can take us and all the places, times and places our thoughts can take us to, we're just going to gently bring those all back, bring your attention back to where you're sitting right now. Just taking a moment to notice how you're sitting, or maybe you're lying down, maybe you're sitting, just permission to be here. Right? Maybe thinking of the future or something still sitting with you from earlier, just gently bringing your attention back to where you're sitting. Right now, as we're here together in this space and community, and noticing your feet on the ground, noticing if you're upright or maybe softly resting back against your chair. And taking a moment as we ground into this moment to look around and just notice the space that you're in. Right? Bringing your back to here and noticing what's here. Just taking a moment. What's in the room with you? To describe this as the flashlight of your attention, just allowing your attention to notice where you are. What's here? Some curiosity. You might feel your bottom on the chair. You might notice your breath. And then we're going to start by cultivating kindness. And one of the ways that we can do this is to think or bring someone to mind, get in contact with someone in your life. Right? Bring to mind someone in your life where you feel kindness, where you've experienced kindness in the relationship. Someone where there isn't too complicated of emotions, someone that you feel cared for and cared by. Bring them to mind. And this might be a friend or a family member. This might be a caregiver. This might be a care professional. This might be a pet. Really seeing if you can bring to mind a relationship where there is care, where there is kindness, where you're met with that deep wish to bring ease and support. Noticing how it feels when you bring this person to mind. How kindness and care exist. As you're noticing this space, just giving yourself permission to know, how does kindness show up in this relationship? Is it kind words? Is it kind gestures? The closeness? Letting yourself move into awareness of what it feels like to be in kindness, in care. And as you're imagining or bringing to mind this person or pet or loved one, just remembering to include yourself in that kindness and care. So we're just going to extend that kindness. You might notice yourself or imagine yourself there, sitting beside or with, in this space of kindness and care, and how it feels. And then we're going to gently turn towards this space of mindful compassion. We're going to sort of step off from this place of care and kindness. And the invitation is to notice or turn towards any pain that might be here. And gently, again, we're practicing a skill and trying on a skill. So just something that feels comfortable to turn towards, that you might have noticed during the symposium. And you might say something like, pain is here. Just acknowledge uncertainty is here. Turning towards gently. We're not immersing in or denying. We're just giving some space to notice and acknowledge. Noticing what's here. And then the invitation to acknowledge the common humanity in suffering. It's normal to feel this way. I'm not alone in this. Others have experienced painful things. Take a moment to notice how you might offer, what you might say to acknowledge that shared humanity. That you're not alone in this. You might even bring to mind where you noticed collective support within this community or within your community. And offering statements of understanding, recognizing togetherness, and then offering statements responding with kindness and care, accessing that deep place of wish for well-being. That you two are going through something difficult. And just like a dear friend, just like a loved one, if they're going through something difficult, we would meet that with care. And so noticing how you would offer that care and kindness to yourself. And this can be hard sometimes. And if it feels difficult to access that place of kindness and care, gentle touch can be supportive. We can bring care to the body and it can soften and help us to bring it into our thoughts. So you might notice a hand on your chest, or sometimes it's a gentle embrace. Just bringing some gentle touch. You might even hold your hands, whatever that is for you, bringing care and kindness, genuine intention to bring support to pain. And what thoughts or offerings come to mind might be, my well-being matters. May I be kind to myself. May I experience ease. Noticing the kindness that you would offer yourself. And again, if you find that difficult, it can be helpful to bring to mind a friend and consider, what kindness, what would I offer to a friend? And can I offer that to myself? That you too deserve kindness and care. Meeting yourself there. And as we bring this practice to a close, just appreciating again and recognizing all of the care in this space at all levels and individuals and systems. It's bringing together, it's coming together, mobilizing care, the individual level, the family or relational level, systems, advocacy, the care that is mobilized, compassion that is offered. And then we will take a couple breaths together, 2 or 3 breaths together. Nice breath in and out. Another in and out. One last together, in and releasing out. And then I'll turn it back over to you, Jasmine. And thank you for the space together.
Thank you so much, Leanne, for that peaceful and grounding close to our symposium. On behalf of the entire team at Ocumel Canada and at Save Your Skin Foundation, thank you to every speaker, participant, and supporter that has joined us for the past 2 days. Like I mentioned, the recordings and resources will be shared via email in the coming days. We carry the hope and knowledge from these 2 days forward, and we hope you do as well. We have a lot of exciting things happening in 2026, and I'm sure you're going to see some of what was sprinkled in the past 2 days into the new year for our foundation. Please take care of yourselves, and we look forward to continuing this journey with you all. Lastly, a big thank you to our sponsors once again: Medicine, Castle Biosciences, Immunocore, Merck, Bristol Myers Squibb, Regeneron, Insight, and Pfizer. And a big thank you to all of you. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and goodbye now. Bye, everyone.